blog post. But looking at the actual data, I got more confused. And I went and I read the papers that they linked, and I got even more confused at how they got to the numbers they got. Now, if you look at the little chart, you'll see that the largest chunk on all of them.
Hi, welcome to the 90-second Hammer tutorial. Today we're going to do a fast little tutorial on how to place portals inside of the editor Hammer. So grab your entity tool, you can do prop portal. These are going to be the same portals that the portal gun shoots, but only you're going to be able to trigger them via an input instead of the portal gun. So the first thing you do is give it a name if you make a prop portal. And a couple things that you need to do. You're going to want start activated, active. That doesn't mean it's going to start on. We need to do that a different way. And then portal number. There's portal 1 or portal 2. Portal 1 is blue, and portal 2 is orange. You can change the height and width if you want, and the pair doesn't really matter. So you're just going to go ahead and put that on the wall somewhere. Now you'll see in Hammer, in the overhead view, you'll see this little yellow line. You need that to be facing the direction that the portal will be facing. So like that, yellow line faces away from the wall. And the center of the portal will appear at the center of wherever this entity is. So now I'm just going to go ahead and shift drag it over here and do a 180 with it and change its portal number to 2. Hit apply, okay. And now we just need to trigger it. So I have a prop button already here. So you can trigger this anyway with a logic relay. However, I'm going to add on pressed portal set activated state with a parameter override of 1. Then I'm also going to do on button reset set activated state 0. So now they'll stay open for 6 seconds, and that's it. We'll go ahead and compile this, and then we'll head on over to portal 2. Alright, here in portal 2, we have the button activated portal. There we go. Push it one more time. There you go. You've placed portals inside of Hammer.
Is the orange section, which they have labeled as green coffee preparation. And they said that 25 grams of coffee, used in filter coffee, generated about 150 grams of emissions along the way, and I didn't really understand that. Now, I read the paper that they linked to, and frankly, it is a wild piece of literature. They say that coffee can be really bad. It can do up to 15.3 kilos of emissions per kilo of green coffee grown, but if you do things a bit more sustainably, it goes down to 3.51. Confusingly, in the article, it looks like they're using a figure of about 6 kilos per kilo emissions for coffee production. So then I dug into this. How are these numbers so varied, so wide? Well, this paper makes an astonishing leap, and they say people are looking for fresher and fresher coffee, and so what's happening is they're air freighting raw coffee from origin to the point of consumption. They're not. Especially not commercial coffees like coffees grown on large farms in Brazil and Vietnam, which is what this study is looking at. Nobody's air freighting commercial grade coffee. Air freighting coffee is ridiculous. I've done it in my career 2-3 times, always kind of wrapped up in the mania of barista competition. It's expensive, it's ridiculous, it's bad. Everyone's kind of chasing the freshest green coffee, sure, but this is not relevant to commercial or normal coffee consumption. So once you get into that, once you strip out the fact that, yeah, if you do air freight a bunch of coffee 10,000 kilometers, that has an impact on the environment, well, yeah, all the numbers start to dwindle. And there's a really interesting chart here, which has a sort of breakdown of the actual production costs. And if you do it sustainably and you cargo ship the coffee as is normally done, the figure is down to 0.2 to 0.4 kilos of emissions per kilo of coffee, which is still a really long way from that 3.5 number that they started with, because the rest of this paper adds in more emissions for stuff like roasting, packaging, all of that kind of stuff. The problem is, back to the conversation, they're adding on stuff like roasting and preparation and packaging and shipping and all of that kind of stuff too. So that emissions data kind of appears twice. And so actually, if you had sustainably grown coffee as you would typically find for specialty that has been shipped on cargo ships, as is normal, then your 25 grams of filter coffee might produce, I don't know, something like 8 grams of CO2, which is a lot less than the 150 that they're claiming here. So already I've got a big problem with this, but on the plus side, it's a mistake that they make for everything across the board here. The other area that kind of left me a little bit confused was the sort of section for landfill. If you look at this, they say that sending 25 grams of coffee, or probably less actually, would be about 18 to 20 grams of coffee after extraction, plus the filter paper to landfill, generated more emissions than sending an aluminium pod to landfill too. In most cases, I hope most of us are not sending our coffee to landfill and it's going to be composted through proper food waste channels. That would be good. And yes, if you do let paper decompose in landfill, it does emit methane, and methane is bad. But the idea that it's like there's no impact if you just bury an aluminium capsule in landfill because aluminium's inert, which is the premise that they're going with here, that seems kind of wild. But it still seems weird to me to say, yeah, filter papers are bad for the environment. It's better to just manufacture some aluminium and bury it in landfill. That's quite a claim. Like that's a lot for me to take in. And I'm not sure I fundamentally agree with that. And I know aluminium can be recycled, and it should be recycled, and it's a very good idea to recycle aluminium. And if you do use these pods, please empty them, send them for recycling, be a good human. But yeah, the idea that these are somehow better than paper, I just fundamentally struggle with that. So you might think, great, I use a V60, I use a normal amount of coffee, I heat an appropriate amount of water, I'm probably fine. And I was thinking, yeah, that should be good news, right? And then something just needled the back of my brain. And it was soluble coffee. It was instant again. Because I didn't understand how instant could be sort of low impact from an energy consumption perspective. If you make a filter coffee, that's the first time that you're brewing that coffee. With instant coffee, that's actually the second time that you're heating water and brewing that coffee. To make instant coffee, you take a bunch of ground coffee, you extract it incredibly aggressively. Touch on that in a second. Then you would take that liquid, perhaps concentrate it further, and then you would spray dry it or freeze dry it, ship it around the world, and then you would then heat water a second time and brew it kind of a second time, or kind of reconstitute it, because it's just a freeze-dried product. I thought that would be bad, but I looked into it, and there are papers analyzing this kind of stuff. It does get kind of interesting, and it turns out because instant coffee is so efficient in a whole bunch of ways, it's nothing like the energy impact that I expected. Now, when I brew a filter coffee, I might get 20 to maybe 25% of the grounds dissolved in the cup down below. And the limit is typically considered to be about 30%. The rest is just not soluble, unless you've got the fancy toys. And instant manufacturers can basically break down the insoluble material to make it soluble and get their yield all the way up to 50%, which is how 2 kilos of coffee can become 1 kilo of instant coffee. That's amazing. You're basically taking stuff that has no real flavor. It's kind of a bulking agent, but it is extraction, and that's a thing. And because they do it, so intensely and at such high concentrations, per gram of instant, the energy usage is actually pretty low. And so when you reheat it later, it's kind of not that bad. And that surprised me a great deal. Speaking of heating water, and this is the other thing that we need to talk about, pod machines do have an irritating advantage. Let me get one real quick. This is an espresso pod machine. It's by a company called Morning. It's a fancy one. It's very nice if you like that sort of thing. But the way that these things generally work is very clever. They have a small heating block inside them, and because they're only going to heat a small amount of water to brew this little pod, they get hot really quickly without drawing loads and loads of energy. Cheaper Nespresso machines never really get to higher temperatures either. They're not particularly temperature stable. But then let's take a nice, fancy espresso machine. That might take 20 to 30 minutes of pretty solid power consumption to get up to a stable temperature. This might be there in a couple of minutes. Most Nespresso machines that you can buy will go from off to brewing coffee in under 2 minutes. That's a lot faster than 20 to 30. But then you dial in your espresso blend, maybe the first shot runs a little fast, you want to make it again. All of that waste adds up, and very quickly, the waste of brewing espresso at home is really a big deal. So if you're dialing in over and over, there are emissions associated with that waste, but as I've said, nowhere near the emissions claimed, I think, by this article in The Conversation. Ultimately, the takeaways from this are you should be mindful about the coffee that you brew. And yes, conventionally grown coffee grown on very large farms in full sun that needs loads of irrigation and fertilizer, as you might find in larger farms in Brazil and Vietnam, that will have a harder impact on the environment than specialty coffee grown in small farms with shade or, kind of mixed crops in there too. Coffee is not a simple thing. And if you look at all the papers, no one really agrees on anything. But I think what we can agree on is we should be less wasteful. We should brew coffee we care about and enjoy and take maximum pleasure from, because it is having an impact on the world. And yeah, maybe pods aren't the answer that they say it is here. There's waste, you need to brew more of them to get a good cup, and I just don't think it's as simple as pods are better for the environment than filtered coffee. But now I want to hear from you, down in the comments below. Have you read this article? Were you as confused as me by it? Have you read the links that they link to? Thank you again for Science. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, but for now I will say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. This video is sponsored by Notion. Today we're going to explain coffee certifications. By the end of this video, you'll understand what each certification offers and how it might be useful to you in how you want to buy coffee. Certifications in coffee are really pretty popular. They're widespread, but most of us, and that's myself included, would struggle really to understand what exactly each of these different certifications offer, aside from being maybe more sustainable or maybe less ethically dubious. We're going to look at the following certifications today. First up, Fairtrade International. That's the most common Fairtrade mark, and it gets confusing because there's a number of organizations that use the name Fairtrade, like Fairtrade USA, but they're different and separate, and we'll put some links down below about other Fairtrade marks. Then, Rainforest Alliance, which merged with another certification called UTZ back in 2018. We're going to talk about organic coffee. Interestingly, the only legally defined and enforced certification out there. And then Smithsonian Bird-Friendly Coffee, which is, I think, very interesting. Now, in addition to these certifications, I wanted to look at a couple of very large companies' buying programs, and they're notably not certifications but programs. But there's a bit of crossover. These companies buy a lot of coffee, a substantial percentage of the world's coffee, and so it's helpful to understand what their programs are claiming to prioritize in their buying and sourcing. And the ones I chose are the Starbucks Cafe Practices, and that stands for Coffee and Farm Equity, and then the Nespresso AAA Sustainable Quality Program. In researching this video, I decided on a few kind of questions and key criteria to assess and compare these different standards. Not every certification will therefore have something to say for each of these sections, and also it will be hard to get into the real details on each one without this video being like 3 hours long. But I've decided to keep those topics as the kind of structure of the video, and each one is of course time-stamped down below if you want to skip to something in particular. Now, today is minimally my opinions. What I want to do is kind of give you the kind of bare bones, the layouts, the differences between the certifications, but I'm not going to weigh in too heavily on my own personal opinions until maybe towards the end. The questions and the kind of topics are as follows. Firstly, price for coffee. Is there a guaranteed premium or price? How much is it? Then, labour practices. What do these certifications consider essential to prevent things like exploitation? And then, farming practices. What is kind of considered important in how, plants are treated or soil is treated? Then, eligibility. Who actually can attain or get that certification? And then, the cost. Who is sort of on the hook for the cost of the certification? Who pays? And finally, we're going to touch on how these certifications impact coffee quality. I'm not going to lie. This video was tricky to make. The world of certifications is confusing, it's murky, and frankly, often quite boring. But don't worry, we'll keep this entertaining and useful. I've worked in coffee for, nearly 20 years, and I'd probably struggle to explain properly what each of those certifications really means, but that hasn't stopped me having opinions on them, many of which were challenged in researching this video. Now, as part of the research, we obviously contacted each of these organizations, and most were very gracious with their time and very helpful. Certifications are kind of a shortcut. They're there to try and help you make a better, easier purchasing decision. I use them sometimes if I'm in a supermarket, there's 2 bags of bananas and one of them has a certification and one doesn't. Assuming the certified one is more expensive, I would pick that one. But in order to define what is better, I would say that a helpful way to think about these certifications is to consider which set of values has the best kind of overlap with your own. And because of that, I currently say that any one of these certifications is somehow better than the others, but there might be one that fits me personally better than the others. Also, it is common to see certifications overlap with one another rather than compete with one another. I think about the classic triple cert of kind of Fair Trade, Organic, Rainforest Alliance that I often see inside kind of corporate offices where they're trying to buy coffee in a responsible way. Anyway, the last part of this video is also an important one. It's about specialty coffee. Because if you buy it, you'll have noticed a distinct lack of certifications on there, with the exception of organic, which you still see kind of occasionally. It's a kind of small part of the market. Specialty coffee seems to have rejected certifications and is often a little disparaging of them. This is a really important part of this whole discussion, and I've definitely had my mind shifted through researching this video. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start by talking about price. And for many people, this is the most important section. Coffee is too cheap. And I think people want some reassurance that the premium that they might pay when they buy that bag will make its way to the producers directly. This is, however, a tricky topic, and we're going to have to define a couple of kind of jargony acronyms that you'll see used when people talk about coffee pricing. First up is FOB. Now that stands for freight on board. This is the price of coffee once it has been fully processed and prepared for export. This price should cover all of the various different actors in the supply chain, from the producers through to, say, wet millers or dry millers, and it's the price at the point of export. So it is important to remember that the FOB price is not the price received by the producer. The producer will receive a percentage of that price, but that percentage will vary dramatically in different parts of the world. Then you have the term farm gate. Now, this is the price received by the producer for their coffee. If a producer was able to, say, wet mill their own coffee, then their farm gate price would be closer to the FOB price. But do bear in mind, many producers cannot do these additional steps. Now, I don't really see any data in certifications talking about farm gate price. Generally, you'll see FOB price referenced. So let's start with Fairtrade International. Now, I should say, if you're not familiar with it, Fairtrade International actually creates the standards for that Fairtrade certification, but the actual certification processing is carried out by a slightly separate organization called FlowCert. Now, they do the kind of compliance piece in the field. Fairtrade itself is a non-profit that sees itself as a people-led movement for change that works with farmers and workers to improve living standards, to do community welfare, and kind of work on the shared environment. Now, Fairtrade International is the only certification that we're going to talk about today that has a specific guaranteed minimum price mechanism. They will pay a minimum price of $1.40 per pound, or they'll pay a 20-cent premium above the publicly traded price of coffee, which you'll see referenced as the C market price. Basically, the New York Stock Exchange trades coffee commodities, and this is a kind of benchmark price used in most coffee transactions around the world. Even specialty coffee contracts might pay a price based on the C market price, though the premium would be more than a couple of dollars per pound rather than, say, 20 cents, though this varies a lot as well. There are also country-based differentials too. For example, coffees from Costa Rica will achieve a higher differential than coffees from Brazil just because of where they are grown, and this is just for commodity grade as well as for specialty, so there's a kind of market preference for certain coffees. Remember the term differential. I promise it'll be useful again in a minute. I think it's also important to note that of the Fairtrade 20-cent premium that is kind of guaranteed, 5 cents must be reinvested into improving production, and that can be training or into other systems to improve kind of crop health and crop yield. Now, next up is the Rainforest Alliance, which, if you don't know it, it is an NGO that aims, in their words, to create a more sustainable world by using social and market forces to protect nature and improve the lives of farmers and forest communities by making responsible businesses the new normal. Now, Rainforest Alliance doesn't have any fixed or minimum pricing mechanisms. Essentially, the free market decides the value to the producers of being certified. If buyers are willing to spend more on it, then the producer earns more for their certification. However, Rainforest Alliance are working to transition towards what they call a sustainability differential. The idea is that as part of the contract for the coffee, there's an additional differential earmarked as a kind of bonus for the work done on sustainability, and it's separate from any other premiums negotiated for, say, quality. However, there's not much guidance yet on what kind of differential that will be in terms of cold hard cash. Rainforest Alliance just say that this is down to the buyer-seller negotiations, and quite explicitly that Rainforest Alliance will not intervene in these negotiations. Organic farming is a system of food production that excludes the use of synthetic agrochemicals and compounds and focuses on regenerative principles, essentially managing soil, water and energy conservation for ecosystem health and for kind of biodiversity. You're trying to build a kind of more robust, resilient farm by farming in a kind of holistic way. Organic coffee has no fixed premium or differential, though there's enough data in the market that you can kind of work out what it will be. With one exception, in the case of Fairtrade International, they do pay a 30-cent premium for certified organic coffees. And the average premium across all coffees is probably around this number, maybe a tiny bit lower. It's looking like around 27.5 cents. Two things to note though. This is highly variable because it's really hard to distinguish this certification from the rest of the kind of coffee's value or quality. Secondly, that number I'm quoting you is a kind of premium on the FOB price. Historically, a good amount of this premium didn't actually make its way through to the farm gate pricing, though it is changing. Increasing transparency in the coffee trade is helping to undo that a little bit. Bird friendly is next. Now, the Smithsonian scientists developed the bird friendly certification in the late 1990s for coffee specifically, and it's there to kind of conserve the habitat and protect migratory songbirds. Bird-friendly has no pricing mechanics as part of its certification, though it must be organic, so there's maybe some premium kind of guaranteed there. Now, just to quickly touch on the two internal standards, neither Starbucks nor Nespresso have any fixed premiums or minimums, though both talk about paying a premium for quality. Nespresso were clear that while they audit the finances of the supply chain back to the farm, they pay exporters an FOB price, rather than paying producers directly. And matching that, Starbucks also have kind of an open book policy for the kind of financial auditing of their supply chain. But as I said, for either one, there's no real uniform or unified kind of price mechanism or transparency there. Now, let's talk about farm practices. Though with this section, as well as the section on labour, the level of detail involved makes it really kind of difficult to compare. Kind of makes it binary, unless you're an expert in the field. The standard includes something or it doesn't. You understand it or you don't. The nuance, the detail, is really hard to pick apart. Where the standards are publicly available, we've linked to them down below if you want to deep dive and read deeper. To give you an example of kind of how overwhelming these kind of standards are, well, Fairtrade, for example, covers key areas for environmental protection, including things like energy and greenhouse gas emission and reduction, soil and water quality, pest management, biodiversity protection, prohibition of genetically modified organisms and harmful chemicals, and waste management. There are certain requirements that are kind of pass-fail within the kind of time frame of converting to the certification, but it's just kind of a lot. Now, Rainforest Alliance has a kind of similar list of topics, but they focus on a slightly different approach. And they seem to be more focused on a kind of process of development, providing a kind of framework for change and that development. Alongside the kind of mandatory requirements within certain timeframes, they encourage additional development of the farm system of kind of sustainable production. It seems more data-focused and using that data as part of a feedback loop to kind of drive continuous improvement. Organic farming obviously covers a lot of the same ground, built on those foundational ideas of kind of no synthetic agrochemicals and regenerative farming aiming to improve soil health and resilience. There's some variation on organic standards, and there can be a bit of nuance there. Again, it's tricky to turn this into something kind of simple and useful to you, but again, there'll be some more reading down below. Bird-friendly coffee has some more specificity, actually. It requires the following things. It requires at least 10 tree species, 3 distinct layers of canopy, a minimum of 40% shade coverage, and tree height of 12 meters or more. In addition, all farms must be organic certified. I kind of like the simple specificity of that particular certification. Now with Starbucks and Nespresso, because they aren't sort of certifying compliance, they're just trying to verify and encourage best practices, you've got some different approaches. Starbucks runs a point-based system, and while Nespresso's program was developed in kind of conjunction with Rainforest Alliance, and so has a similar feeling of kind of a framework that aims to follow a pathway over time. Let's talk about labour practices. Now, like the farming practices section, this is again a tricky one to split out and compare. There's a lot of crossover between the certifications and programs here. The one outlier, I suppose, is organic certification. However, as that standard changes and evolves, more certifications are starting to kind of aim to include the human aspect of farming more. Now, common topics in all the certifications are kind of zero tolerance policies for things like gender-based violence, child labour, violence, abuse or harassment. Also, record keeping is expected for anyone who works on the farm, such as coffee pickers, and they must be paid what is described as fairly, transparently and promptly, though fair pay for these kind of workers is a bit of a controversial topic, lacking in, I would say, meaningful standards. I wish I knew how to break these down more, but the detail is just overwhelming and it feels impossible to summarize in a way that feels useful to you when you're looking at a wall of coffee in a supermarket or in a coffee shop and deciding which one to pick. You'll occasionally see some kind of undercover journalistic work, kind of revealing breaches in human rights or working conditions on certified farms. Now, I think these pieces of journalism are useful and they're very necessary, but they don't invalidate the certifications to me. You know, great journalism provides useful pressure on those certifying bodies to try and increase efforts to contain or remove bad actors, but these bad people are human and they are kind of inevitable. Laws are not deemed useless because people break them, especially not because they break them and manage to get away with it. And I kind of feel the same way about certifications. And in the past, if I'm honest, I've been dismissive of things like fair trade and used this as evidence, and I don't think that's actually a good argument or good thinking. Talk about eligibility. Now, this one's interesting to me and probably a surprise for many people. Fairtrade International only certifies producer groups, and these producer groups must be democratically organized and they must primarily consist, by that's above 66%, of small-scale producers. Now, this is their term, and they define it. A small-scale producer, their farm must be managed by the kind of member of the group and their family, and they cannot hire permanent labor. Larger producers, with farms between, say, 5 hectares and 30 hectares, can join a producer group, but the majority, more than 50% of the certified coffee that the group produces must come from these small-scale producers. This means if you owned a larger farm, you simply cannot attain a Fairtrade International certification. And this is one of the reasons that Fairtrade USA is a separate entity that aims to kind of broaden the church of producers to kind of able to earn that certification. Now, Rainforest Alliance doesn't really have any eligibility requirements for producers. In fact, other members in the supply chain who kind of process coffee can also be certified as well. Organic certifications are, again, open, and often several entities in the supply chain must be certified for the final product to be sold as certified organic. For example, a coffee roasting company must hold a certification to sort of, sell organic labeled coffee. Bird-friendly certifications require an organic certification, so you could argue that only organic farms are eligible to be bird-friendly. Interestingly enough, though, they'll often kind of combine those certifications, that kind of visit, audit part of the whole thing. Other than that, it's open to anyone. With Starbucks, anyone is eligible to be part of their program, but there's work to be done before you can start selling to them, such as opening up your price transparency so Starbucks can see where the FOB price historically has been going, and then you adopt their cafe practices and a third party verifies them. The Nespresso approach is interesting. Anyone who is farming coffee in the regions that they're sourcing from can kind of opt into the program and immediately receive kind of free training and support. And so once they're adopting the kind of principles, should they choose to, they can sell their coffee to Nespresso for the kind of guaranteed AAA premium. The idea is that while the producer is free to sell to someone else, because Nespresso know how the coffee was grown, they're willing to pay a premium for that because it's more valuable to them. Now let's talk about who pays for the certification. Now, fair trade certification costs do vary dramatically, but that cost is borne by the producer group as a whole. Those fees actually go to FlowCert, which is the certification body that we mentioned earlier on, and is separate from fair trade, and so it's the one carrying out the auditing and certification. If you're curious, there are price calculators online if you want to go and look and experiment. Again, we'll leave a link down below. With Rainforest Alliance, the farmers pay for the certification audit, and Rainforest say they don't regulate those costs. The market regulates those costs. With the variance in farm size and location, there's obviously no single price for an audit. Additionally, any costs of kind of meeting the demands of the standard are to be met by the farmer, and that might be the costs of kind of changes to land use or for new infrastructure. This is, I presume, what the sustainability differential mentioned earlier on is aiming to cover or to kind of compensate for. With organic and bird-friendly, as before, the certification costs are again borne by the producer. With Starbucks and Nespresso, these are both internal programs, not certifications, so there's no kind of cost of certification here. And technically, both are free to join, though Starbucks has a slightly different approach to Nespresso, as I mentioned before. If you want to start Starbucks, this is the way of kind of proving that you're doing the right thing and to also then receive some support in improving. Nespresso kind of just present it as a kind of free to join in exchange for free support. Starbucks and Nespresso both incur significant cost in these programs, and they finance them in slightly different ways. Starbucks issued, I think, sustainability bonds, the last one being a $1 billion bond, and then you kind of use the proceeds from that to kind of fund this stuff. And Nespresso's sustainability fund is a vehicle for it to raise external funding again for this kind of work. Let's talk about cup quality. And now, I think this is an important aspect to discuss quickly, especially for those of you who watch this channel and would care about the taste of the coffee that they drink. When it comes to fair trade, I think people presume that the coffees are all commodity grade. This isn't the case. There are wonderful and delicious coffees that are also fair trade certified. These will obviously receive a higher differential or premium compared to kind of lower quality coffees.
Let's call my brothers.
What's up guys, welcome back to Gabriel Gaprod. Today we are going to see a simple shader that has a very interesting outcome. It's the Galaxy shader, and it looks pretty cool in a lot of objects. And accompanied with a few particle systems, it can look pretty interesting. And by the way, I made all of these 13 Galaxy FX variants that are only available on my Patreon page. And I'll have a link in the description in case you are interested. You help the channel going forward, and you get access to some pretty cool effects, shaders and more that you can use in your game. Alright, so with that being said, let's see how we can do this. So here's the Y-bot. This character is from Mixamo, by the way, and I'm going to create a Galaxy shader for this character with an unlit graph, and I am in the Universal Render Pipeline, by the way. You can start with other graphs if you want. There shouldn't be a lot of difference, and unlit only means that it will not be affected by light, by the way. And once we created the shader, we can double click it, and basically the idea of the shader revolves mainly around one node, the view direction in world space. This basically gives access to vectors that goes from the vertex of the mesh in direction to the camera. So let's first add a cube map property, call it Galaxy, and I'm going to choose one of these galaxies.
Hello everyone and welcome to the 23rd Hammer tutorial in the version 2 series. This tutorial will apply to all Source Engine games. I will be using Counter-Strike Global Offensive to complete this tutorial. Today we will be going over applying textures to your level. We're going to most over in the face edit sheet, so open that up by pressing Shift A or this button over on the left here. And we're going to start by texturing this building here. If you don't know the basic controls for the face edit sheet, left click will lift the texture, right click will apply it to a face. Go and click Browse here and do a search for brick. We're going to be using this texture set here of Brick Wall 045. I have versions A, B, and F here. Your game may not have these textures, but there will probably be a set of brick textures that contains a bottom, a middle, and a top texture. We're just going to grab this and right click to apply to the bottom here. And we've already run into a small speed bump. It's not aligned to the bottom, so what we're going to do is we're going to left click to select it. And then we're going to click under Justify B for bottom. What this does is it shifts the texture and aligns it with the bottom extent of that brush. So now we're just going to apply it to the rest of the faces here. And oh no, look, we've got another problem. So the other problem is that we have the bottom concrete in the middle of the brush. So we'll just grab the top texture and we'll apply it. So the molding at the top is there, but now we have it in the middle. So we actually have to cut this brush. We're going to cut it using the clipping tool, and we're just going to draw the line, and we'll see the line at the top here. And we're using split mode, so both sides are white. We'll click that. So now we have this top part, which is just the top, and we have this middle part. And if you'll notice, the top part is 128 units. 512 by 512 textures at the default scale of 0.25 will fit on a 128 by 128 sized brush. So in theory, we should just be able to grab this bottom texture and plop it there. But if you notice, we back away from the texture, there's this weird white line here. This is due to how texture filtering works. And the way around this is to actually use the middle texture instead of the bottom or the top one. So we're going to click Browse, and we're going to grab our middle texture and just right click to apply it. The issue's still there though. We have to make another small adjustment. We're going to grab these two here, and then we're going to go to the vertex tool by pressing Shift V, and we're going to select the vertices that are on that line. We're just going to use our arrow keys and nudge it up about 4 units. And press Shift S to go to selection tool. Now we back up, that line's not there anymore because the top part isn't butted up to the bottom, or the bottom part isn't butted up to the top, so we don't get that weird texture filtering issue. So now we want to go ahead and wrap it around to the other sides. So we're going to grab the bottom and right click over here. And we'll notice that there's a bit of a discontinuation of the texture here where it kind of jumps. We actually want to wrap this around. So this is where Alt right click comes in. So by selecting this as the source face, holding the Alt key on our keyboard, and then right clicking the faces over here, we'll see that they changed a little bit. Now the texture wraps perfectly around this corner, which makes it just look overall nicer. So we're going to hold Alt and right click the rest of these faces, and we're going to do the same thing with the top texture. The last thing we need to do to complete this wall is make the same split brush here and use the middle texture that we did on the other side. And then hold Alt and right click to wrap around. Now the last part that we have to do is this curved cylinder. We're going to start by making that same cut that we did over here because we have to use 3 brushes to get the textures to fit properly. So there's the first cut and there's the second cut. So now we have 3 different brushes here. And we're going to grab this face here and hold Alt and right click the first face here. Now, if I hold Alt and don't change my source face, we're going to get these weird repeating and clipping issues. When you hold Alt and right click to wrap the texture, you need to constantly update your source face. If the source face stays the same, it's going to wrap it very weirdly. So we're using this as a source face. We wrap the first one, change our source, wrap the next, change the source, wrap the next. So we're constantly changing the source face. And we just need to do this for all of these. And there we go. Now we have a perfectly wrapped texture around a curved piece of brush. This is one of the biggest things that I see new people do, is they don't wrap their textures around, and it just makes it look a little shoddy, and it makes it truly stand out as someone who's new at the development tools. By just wrapping your textures, it kind of bumps up the level of professionalism in your work. Having nice geometry with very bad texturing is an easy way to make it look bad, and if you're very proficient at texturing, you can make really simple geometry look very nice, as long as you align and use the correct textures. The next thing we're going to do is texture this sidewalk, which has a bit advanced geometry to it. We have an arch over here, and then a cylinder that's been cut into a fourth over here. So it's a basic sidewalk, which has a curved turn and another curved end cap. We're going to go ahead and search for concrete. There's actually a texture from Train that we're going to use, which is this one right here, this HR Sidewalk A Tint Dark. Going to select that. and I'm just going to throw it onto the wall over here so we can look at it. We have three parts of this texture. We have this dark gray part here, the front here, which is going to be the front of the sidewalk, and the squares, which will be the sidewalk themselves. So let's go ahead and just put this front on really quick. We need to do a little bit of manipulation to get it exactly how I want it. So we're just going to right-click apply to the front, and we can already tell that it's rotated wrong. So we'll rotate it 90 degrees, and then we'll align it to the right, which is the wrong side. So we'll align it to the left, which is the correct side. So now we're going to make this texture, we're going to make this brush taller, and we can see that I want this part, this top part here, to be at the top. So we're going to pull this down some, and that front part fits very well onto a brush that is 17 units high. So now we're going to turn this texture lock on the top. What this does is it's a scaling texture lock. So when we rescale the brush, it's going to keep the exact same amount of texture there. So we'll turn that on, and we'll scale it back down, and it's going to swoosh the texture a little bit, which is what we want. So now we're going to click on that, and we see that the texture scale is 0.118. So we're going to copy that and replace the Y and hit apply. And now we have a not messed up part. So we're just going to wrap it around. Now we just need to put the top part on. So we're going to do that exact same way. We're going to select it, and then we know it's rotated wrong, so we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. And then we're going to align it to the bottom, and then left, which isn't quite what we want. So we're going to make it bigger again. And make sure you turn off scaling texture lock before you stretch the texture. All right. So I'm actually going to move it with my arrow keys to align the squares to this right side here. And now I'm going to grab my clipping tool and clip up onto this line here where I want the texture to stop. That's perfect. So now we have a little bit taller. We need to go to 128 height. So we're going to turn texture lock back on, the scaling texture lock, bring it in, and we'll see that our scale is 0.227. So we want to change the Y as well. And now we'll have perfect squares, which is what we wanted. So now we have a problem with the arches here, because arches are curved. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap using the back face of this texture to get our curve in. So we're going to select the long top as our source. Alt right click it to the back. So now we have this here. We're going to alt right click that to the angled sides, and we're going to do this all the way around. And then we're going to grab the first angled part and wrap around to the top. And we're going to do that for each angled bit. And right off the bat, we can see that it looks better. It's not perfect, but it is much better than the alternative. So you might just need to do a little bit of manual texture shifting, I guess, to make it look good. So we're just going to take these and maybe get rid of some of the lines, because these big lines are what make it look really bad. And then that's probably good enough. If you spend more time manually aligning it, you'll have a much better time. The last thing I'm going to show you guys is how to do an arch. Arches are essentially the exact same as what we just did, but they're vertical instead. We're just going to stone texture arch this front-facing part here. So we're going to grab our stone texture. Just going to grab one from Aztec here.
That's a lot of red. And I am colorblind, so that's not a lot of red. I just kind of felt like talking about my Nintendo Switch game collection here, not necessarily because it's wildly impressive. I mean, there's a lot of games here, but I haven't really sought out to collect a bunch of Nintendo Switch games. More so, I just have a lot of them. And I just felt like talking about why I own Fitness Boxing too, because who else is gonna do that? So I'm recording this in January of 2023. So obviously there will probably be some games that come out after this where I'm gonna own them. So that's why some games are gonna be missing here. And of course some games may be missing in general because I have standards. But yeah, I've bought a lot since the Nintendo Switch launched in 2017. It's a really fun console to get games for. However, like, not at the same time. Like, I love how all the games, nearly all the games, follow this red spine aesthetic. But it's really annoying at the same time because it's really hard to see from a distance, like, oh, what I have instantly, what I don't have instantly. So I can kind of forget sometimes because I have bought some games digitally and some games physically only. So it may be kind of hard to remember sometimes. But back in 2017, I remembered when it was really special when a Nintendo Switch game got a physical release. A lot of those indie games like Binding of Isaac and It'll Do 2 getting physical releases was like, oh my god, this is crazy. And I was like, what, like the Switch has its own like chicken shoot? Wow. It takes a lot to be a Nintendo Switch game, and we're halfway there. We exist. But I'll just go through all these games. I haven't played all of them, but I have played most of them. A lot of the ones that I haven't played yet, I just bought, so I'm gonna get to them eventually. I'm in kind of a break mode right now. You know, I've been playing a couple games here and there, so I'll definitely get to a couple of these, but I'll mention if I haven't played them yet, and if I do plan on playing them. So, without further ado, let's talk about the first game on the shelf, which is, damn it, 1-2 Switch. The first Switch game that I own, the first game on my shelf, alphabetically. Yeah, so this one gets a lot of hate, mainly because it's bad. I have a lot of tolerance for Nintendo's casual efforts. In fact, I like a fair amount of them. This one, though, it has some good ideas. It's mainly focused on the idea of, oh, let's do a multiplayer game where the screen is very much subdued. It's kind of in the background. It's mainly focused on what you and the other player are doing, looking at each other, and you're kind of doing video gamey things without looking at the video portion most of the time. When I say most of the time, that's kind of one of the problems with 1-2 Switch. I don't really know if that's actually the main theme, considering maybe like half the games in here you are looking at the screen. Like, is it a tech demo for the Switch? Like, not really, kinda. Like, there are some games that are really tech demo-y, you know, like the one that everybody talks about, which is the game where you move the Joy-Con around and the HD rumble makes you feel like, oh, there are marbles in this Joy-Con. Or something like the eating contest minigame where you hold the Joy-Con up and you make eating motions in front of the IR camera. But outside of that, like, there's not a lot of other tech demo-y games. There's a lot of stupid games, like whatever, the walking down the showroom floor and pretending to be a model. Like, what are we doing there? If there was a video portion of that, sure. Like actually make that a game. But it's not, so it's kind of hard to understand, like, how do you win at that? What, do you move your hips more? Do you have to do more exaggerated motion? What do you do? And then in addition, like, yeah, there's, like 28 games in this whole entire collection, and each of them are incredibly shallow. Like, you're only gonna play them, like, once or twice with a specific group of people. I will maintain 1-2 Switch is pretty fun that first time you play with a new group of people, but after that, I don't know, man. Like, I remember it was 2017. It was my first year of college, my second semester, my first year of college, and I decided, you know what? I'm gonna be that guy. I'm gonna bring my Nintendo handheld to school. I brought my Switch. Like, it was the launch month. I was still excited about it, and I thought, like, you know, me and my friends would usually get lunch together at the student union, where, you know, they have a lot of tables to sit at and a lot of different areas that are a little quieter than others, blah, 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 blah. We sit down, and I'm just like, hey, you guys want to try 1-2 Switch? So we sit down, we try it, and it's a lot of fun that first time. And then I try bringing it the second time, and we're all just kind of like, okay, you know, we've already done this. There's some good ideas in here, but they just do not come together. It's a very shallow package. There's not a lot of replay value. There's not a lot of coolness to it. Like, there's a couple games that are kind of cool, but man, like, it does deserve a lot of the hate it got. I do have a little bit more of an appreciation for it than I think a lot of other people do, but I'm not gonna act high and mighty because of that. I know I'm a fucking idiot. It is like a solid, like, 4 out of 10, maybe 5 out of 10. But I'm leaning a little more towards 4. Next up, we have Animal Crossing New Horizons, which this is one of the physical games that I have that doesn't get a lot of play because I did buy New Horizons digitally. I buy a couple of my Switch games digitally. It's mainly like if I'm really excited on playing it. That is the best way to play a game. Like, at midnight, if you want to be there at day 1, hour 1, minute 1. Just buy it digitally. But of course, if you want the insurance plan that the physical version brings you, which is the fact that, you know, I own this, and of course you have to wait. You know, everything in life has a pro and con. I decide to go for both pros and cons and buy both the digital and physical versions. I usually buy the physical version later on if I find it for a good price. That is for games that I buy digitally. But yeah, Animal Crossing New Horizons. I love this game. Of course, I loved it back when it came out. A month later or so. I haven't really played it much since, but I did get like 100+ hours out of it, so I did get my money's worth out of this game. It was a lot of fun. I think New Horizons really did help show a lot of people like what the fun in Animal Crossing is. However, I feel like other games in the series were more fun. So I played all the Animal Crossing games, but I didn't get into them like I did New Horizons. And I feel like a lot of people have a similar history like I do, where, you know, hey, there are millions and millions of Animal Crossing fans, but there's a lot of people that tried Animal Crossing, but just never really got into it, appreciated it, and thought, like, hey, this is good, this is a fun time, but I'm not getting hooked into it. But then New Horizons came out, and that was like, yeah, this is awesome. This is incredibly addicting. The problem is New Horizons was very light in terms of reasons to keep going past that first month. I think all Animal Crossing games have this issue to some extent. I remember a lot of people talking about New Leaf and City Folk as in like, man, like there's just nothing to do. And, you know, you ask them, it's just like, okay, well, how long have you been playing? And they're like 5 months. And it's just like, most games last you 10 hours. Like, it's pretty crazy this game lasted you 5 months. But I think the main thing that frustrates me, along with a lot of other people, is that you can see how they could design the game to just stay fresh for a very long time without having to add so much content. You know, there are certain tweaks you could do, and there are certain just additions they could have made, or different just resources they could have allocated in different places to make this game a lot more replayable and a lot more playable after that first 100 hours. Because Animal Crossing is a game that's meant to be played forever. It's a game that's meant to stay fresh for a very long time. A game that you're meant to check in like every day or every couple days, whatever. And considering how this game lacked a lot of the features that New Leaf had, City Folk had, Wild World had, the GameCube version had, you know, I don't expect every version to come forward to every single entry, but man, there was a lot of like features that should have been there since day one in New Horizons. And they were added eventually, but they were added as free updates, as if it was supposed to really keep you invested in the game. Old shit. And then in addition, just the fact that they stopped developing the game. Like, this feels like it could have been Nintendo's Sims. How EA just keeps making expansion packs for Sims 4, and they made $1 billion for the Sims 3 and Sims 2 and Sims 1. Yeah, I mean, kudos to them for saying like we're done when we're done, and they did only one little expansion pack, the Happy Home Paradise, and that was cool. I never played it, but I did see a lot of it being played, and it seemed like a cool meaty addition. It was pretty neat that they turned like a spin-off game, which was Happy Home Designer for the 3DS, into like just a part of the, you know, New Horizons, the new mainline entry. That was pretty cool. But it just always felt like New Horizons was just missing that extra bit of meat to really make it like really, really worthy of just replaying constantly. The only reason why I'd really want to replay this is if I started over all over again. Like, you look at New Leaf and playing with others online, there was just so much more to do. There was these little mini games you could do, and in New Horizons, it's a lot more of like, well, at least you all have your health. There's even stuff they added in like the New Leaf update, the Welcome Amiibo update, where you could play Desert Island Escape from Amiibo Festival and Puzzle League in the game. That was cool, but it feels like in New Horizons, a lot of the fun you kind of have to make yourself, especially playing in multiplayer, online multiplayer with everybody. You kind of have to come up with games yourself because there's nothing to do. And at nighttime, there's barely anything to do. You can go to the Roost, but it's also like, that what's there to gain from that? I don't know, I love the variety that New Horizons brought to the Animal Crossing series. I felt like the concept in this game was really fun, really interesting. You know, being on your own desert island and having more customization than ever before. It all added up to a really great experience that just didn't last as long as I wanted it to. It's lacking in a lot of features that previous games had at launch, but overall, I got 100 plus hours out of the game. It's hard to complain too much, but I just hope that the next entry, they kind of combine a lot of the cool stuff that New Horizons introduced with a lot of the mainstay Animal Crossing features that they may have introduced later on via updates in New Horizons, or just didn't even return. And I think this would be like an amazing game. But right now, it's a fantastic game that I think everybody should at least give a try, but it definitely has some weak points to it. And considering how long we waited for this game after New Leaf, I think it was fair to expect a bit more from it. Next up on the list is ARMS. I don't know. So this came out in June of 2017, only a couple months after the Switch launch, which is why it did so well. It sold millions of copies. That's the only reason it did so well, is because everybody who owned a Switch at the time was just like, yeah, sure. That just goes to show it's really worth it to be there at the launch of the system, because I saw how Ubisoft was underwhelmed by the sales of Mario + Rabbids Sparks of Hope in 2022. compared to Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle in 2017. And I feel like a reason why maybe Sparks of Hope didn't sell as well was just because, like, yeah, you know, people were more willing to just say, yeah, f it. Not that either Mario plus Rabbids games are bad games, but, you know, like, people are more willing to take a chance on a game that, you know, they're not really sure about back in, you know, during the launch year of a system. And ARMS was definitely the case. This is not a bad game. This has a lot of love poured into it, I can tell. However, it kind of feels like Nintendo developed this game more so with the intention of just replicating the success of Splatoon, rather than like them having like a really amazing idea that just all came together, and they were like, no, we're really passionate and it has to be this way and this way and that way. Yeah, this just kind of felt like Nintendo was trying to do another Splatoon in a different genre, and it just ended up being a little confused. I felt using the motion control worked, but the fact is it wasn't necessary. You could use a standard controller. Nintendo kind of wanted it to be a bit of an esports fighting game, not like super into it, but they held like tournaments and all of that, and the modes in the game just feel a lot more like they wanted this to be taken seriously as like an actual competitive fighting game. And it just really wasn't that. I felt like ARMS was really boring to watch. Now to play, it could be a decent amount of fun, but the problem is, like, I felt like it wasn't deep enough to be a competitive fighting game, and it wasn't silly and stupid enough to be just a fun party game. Like, I feel like it just didn't satisfy both camps. There wasn't a lot of like items to play around with. The stadiums you would play in didn't have like a ton of wacky, fun gimmicks. Smash Brothers has wackier, funnier gimmicks. The characters were all well designed. They were all cool, but their attributes, the things that made them special, I felt like didn't make them like special enough to really be like that much like, oh, this is my character. They all play differently. It wasn't like they were like Mario Kart characters where it's just like, oh, this one's a little heavier. No, they had different moves and all of that, but like Ribbon Girl's thing was like, oh, she can double jump. And then a lot of the funky side modes in the game just felt more like mini games, like break the targets in Smash Brothers. That's genuinely a mode in ARMS. It's just like, oh yeah, break the targets, and yeah, it feels more like a mini game. Yeah, that's also a mode in Smash Brothers, but Smash Brothers has all this other stuff. And ARMS felt very, very lacking in content at launch, and they did add to it over time. They added even like that badge system, which gave you incentive to just actually keep playing through the game, which is something that I felt like was a problem with the game. It felt like they didn't put a lot of content in the game because they had online multiplayer, and the online multiplayer, oh, you're gonna play endlessly because it's online multiplayer and it's a fighting game. Do the math. But it felt like the replay value in the game kind of depended on the player, which is me, desperately wanting to be the best of the best in ARMS, really learn the game inside and out. When I just want to play a damn video game. Yes, I'm willing to learn how to play the game properly and how to play to the best of my ability, but I'm not interested in playing competitively, and a lot of the modes in ARMS, like a lot of the replay value in ARMS, felt like it really depended on you wanting to train and train and train to be a good competitive player. And if that wasn't the case, I didn't see it because there just wasn't enough content in the game, and pretty much all the content just depended on that. And it kind of felt like the world and the characters and all of that felt like they really wanted this to be Splatoon in the sense that, like, oh, it has its own language. Oh, like, here's a little bit of lore here and there. But it just didn't really feel as organic as it did with Splatoon. ARMS just kind of felt like they wanted to follow the same steps down to the content release method. Just the fact that, oh, here's a game that has a little bit of single player, but you're really going to want to play it for the multiplayer. And I don't think this is a bad game, but I just didn't think it was deep enough for me personally. I know a lot of other people disagree, and I don't disagree with them. It's more so based on like how I wanted to play ARMS and what I want when I pop this game in. It just didn't really deliver that, but it's fine. I think graphically it looks fantastic. I think the music is great. I think presentation-wise they knocked it out of the park with this one. It's fantastic. But I just hope if they do a sequel that they kind of learn from the mistakes of ARMS 1 and they just kind of make it a little more of a fully fleshed out game. I'd love to see more party game elements thrown in, as well as some competitive fighting game elements. I think that's what makes Smash Brothers so popular, is the fact that both people can play. And the fact that this game just doesn't really have enough to satiate either audience shows that it either needs to pick a lane or needs to cater to both a little better. All right, next up, we have, might as well just do these both at the same time. It's the Assassin's Creed games on Switch. Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered in the Rebel Collection, which is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag and Assassin's Creed Rogue. Yeah, there's not much to say about this one. Assassin's Creed 3, I remember not running well on Nintendo Switch, or at least I think I remember the trailer that they showed in a Nintendo Direct of Assassin's Creed 3 looked horrible. I don't know what was going on there, because it's just like, this is Assassin's Creed 3. It's not like you're porting like Assassin's Creed Unity from the PS4 or something. No, this is like, why? But yeah, it was cool to see Ubisoft bring over some of the older Assassin's Creed games, not only to Nintendo Switch, but they also took this as an opportunity to bring over Assassin's Creed 3 to PS4 and Xbox One, which I always think is really cool, mainly because these are the kind of games that you don't see them do that much with, kind of like those yearly annual games from the Xbox 360 era, which I really liked seeing them do that with, even like the Lego games, some of the Call of Duties too. It's just good to have some of those games available on more modern platforms, because they're all full-fledged games. Like, there's no reason not to play like a game like Assassin's Creed 3 or Assassin's Creed 4 in this day and age, you know, but just their release method kind of makes it seem like, oh, the new one replaces the old one. It's like, I disagree. A lame thing about these two releases is how, since they both include, like, another game, which I find it also weird how Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered includes Assassin's Creed Liberation, but it's just called Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. But Assassin's Creed 4 includes Assassin's Creed Rogue as well. That's called a collection. But you have to download the extra games here, and they are very, very large. But either way, we've definitely come a long way since the old school Assassin's Creed portable games, like Assassin's Creed games on the DS, Assassin's Creed on the PSP, and Liberation on the Vita. Liberation on the Vita actually got pretty close to like, oh man, this is home console quality, but it was still a little crunchy. Yeah, then we have just full-blown Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed 4, which is a lot of people's favorite, on a portable, which is pretty cool. I, for one, have never been the biggest Assassin's Creed guy. Maybe one day I'll give him more of a chance, but every time I played it doesn't really hook me. Or maybe I just haven't given it enough of a shot, so maybe someday, but for now, Next up, we have Astral Chain, which is Nintendo published, Platinum Games title. I didn't play too much of this one. I played it for about an hour. I played it thinking, I'm like, yeah, I just don't think I'm much of a Platinum Games guy, but I have since popped in Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U version, of all things, mainly because I wanted to get, like, footage of all the Wii U releases. And I was like, alright, I need to sit down and actually play more of, like, Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U. So I did that, and I actually started to get really into it. I feel like a lot of Platinum Games hack and slashes, at least for me, it took a while for me to just, them to kind of click with me. But ever since, like, yeah, like, I've been playing Bayonetta 3, which I'll talk about in a bit. But, yeah, it just took a little bit for me to fully click with Platinum Games, like, hack and slashes. Which is really embarrassing because, like, it's not that they're, like, really that complicated. But yeah, like I said, this didn't really click for me at first, but I'm sure, like, if I play through it now, I'll actually be like, oh man, this is actually pretty good. So yeah, initially my opinion was like, it's fine, just not for me. Now I'm definitely interested in giving it another go and seeing what I think about it. Next up is a game that I recently bought, so I haven't really gotten into yet. This is one that I really want to try out because whenever I've seen trailers of this and ever since it came out, I saw a lot of people talk about it, and it sounds incredible. It's the Atari 50, well, just Atari 50, the anniversary celebration, which Atari compilations are always a dime a dozen. It's really hard to get excited for them these days. I think it's nice to have access to these old school games on modern platforms all the time. I think it's fantastic. The Atari Flashback Classics on Switch has so many games in it, but you know, just because they have like over 100 Atari games or something along those lines, who gives a shit? But Atari 50 aims to celebrate a lot more than just the standard stuff that you always see like re-released, like the Atari 2600 games and a couple of the 5200 games. This one has pretty much most of Atari's like console history represented on here, with numerous games from numerous consoles playable. Most notably the Atari Jaguar. And they also have a decent amount of Atari Jaguar games on here. It is pretty impressive because Atari Jaguar is very hard to emulate. And this was done by Digital Eclipse, and this is like a really, really impressive collection from what I've seen. From also what I've seen, this is supposed to be kind of experienced more of like an interactive like museum, kind of a with documentary aspects and whatnot. It's not like any other collection, though you can still play it as one. But there's a reason why they call it the Anniversary Celebration, because it's supposed to be like a historical celebration of everything Atari. And that's really cool. Like, they include Jaguar Atari Lynx, a lot of Atari's computer games, like Atari ST, I believe. They even have some new experiences in here. It says on the back that they completed Sword Quest Air World, which, if you're not aware of like Sword Quest on Atari, it was kind of this 4-game lineup of these mythical quests where players would find like specific clues. They'd have to like write in to Atari when they find like all the clues and all of that, and answer the riddles, and you know, they would then compete. You know, the ones that found the riddles would compete, and you know, like they would win prizes and all of that. It was kind of like this big, it was supposed to be this big quest kind of thing. But Air World, the 4th game in that lineup, was never released, never finished. So apparently, they did it here. That is pretty cool. I'm very interested in trying this one out. So yeah, Atari 50. Very happy to own this. Even more excited to try it out. Next up, I got a Zor Striker Gunvolt Striker Pack. This was an older release that I picked up, as in, like, I played it a while ago. And yeah, these are 2 quality games that are kind of spiritual successors to the Mega Man Zero series. You know, they're made by the same people, and they were originally made for the 3DS. I didn't play a ton of these, however, from what I remember, it was a decent amount of fun, and I really liked the HD Rumble. The HD Rumble in these games was pretty wild, because it did feel like electricity was flowing through my little thumbs. But yeah, that's just kind of a simple, you know, re-release of 3DS games on the Switch, so that's pretty good. Next up, I have Balan Wonderworld, because, you know, I'm a masochist. Yeah, so this game isn't very good. I think we've all kind of accepted that. It's very interesting that they even released it. It's not that it's, like, broken or anything like that. It's just very low quality. It doesn't look quality. It doesn't play quality. It isn't quality. It's just very bad. And some people will, you know, defend this game. I don't get them. But hey, you do you. In a little bit, I'll talk about Big Brain Academy, Brain versus Brain. So, who's the true fucking idiot? But yeah, this is a very poor game, and this is the poorest version of them on the Switch. So maybe I should play it on the PS5. Maybe that helps things. And next up, I'll get through all these, all in one. These are all the Bayonetta games. I have Bayonetta 1, which I have 2 copies of. This one's sealed, because I'm really cool. The first Bayonetta was re-released via like a physical copy here in North America a little bit before Bayonetta 3 released. A lot of people were like, oh, you better get on that. It's gonna be rare someday. That probably means it won't be. But I thought it was pretty cheap, so I just thought, like, you know what? I'll buy both. I'll buy 2 copies. Why not? It's kind of fun to own. It's a novelty, because Bayonetta 1 already released on the Switch, just here in North America it was digital only. So, I don't know. It's just kind of cool to own. And then we also have Bayonetta 2, which released in 2018, early 2018, like February or so. And yeah, it comes with a full game download for the original Bayonetta. And then Bayonetta 3, which finally released in 2022. It's still very surreal that this game finally came out. I feel like it just kind of shows how a lot of people online will beg and beg and beg for something to come out. And then when it comes out, they just kind of take it for granted. Like, they didn't wait that long. Who cares? Like, I don't really care. Or, like, it just kind of feels like people will say, like, I want this, when they don't really want it. I want a new F-Zero. You have shown no reason for me to believe you. But yeah, I'll group all the Bayonetta games together, mainly because it's not that they're all the same, more so that Bayonetta is one of the most consistent series of all time, in the sense that it really does feel like a three-parter. Like, it really does feel like these are just one big game with, like, Bayonetta 1 being Act 1, Bayonetta 2 being Act 2. But I also don't really mean that. I mean, they feel like complete games in themselves. It's not like, oh man, this ends, and it's just like, what happens next? It's more so like when you play Bayonetta 1, then you play Bayonetta 2. And Bayonetta 2 is more of like, just more of the same from Bayonetta 1, but just better. And then Bayonetta 3, I don't know if it's better than Bayonetta 2, but it's also, it's more Bayonetta. But it's also not that. I feel like calling these games more Bayonetta is kind of a disservice to them, but that's just always what it feels to me. The Bayonetta series has like very strict traditions in terms of like each game starts in a very similar way, and they always have these same things that happen, but they're still different. It's not like, oh, we're doing this again kind of thing. Like, no, it's always interesting to see, like, okay, what does this game do now? But what I'm trying to say is all these games are very similar. Of course they're going to be, because, you know, it's part of the same series. While each of them have defining aspects to them, you can kind of pick up any game and play it. Who cares? If you want to start with Bayonetta 3, you can start with Bayonetta 3. If you want to start with 2, you can start with 2. If you want to start with 1, you can start with 1. The story is there, but it really doesn't matter. A lot of times stuff just happens, and I'm just like, okay. We got to the part in 3, Bayonetta just rips her heart out, does something with it. I don't know. It was kind of cool. It was interesting. I'll give it that. I'm not calling the story stupid. It's just very silly sometimes. And it's definitely not necessary to enjoy the Bayonetta series. And that's coming from somebody who didn't really play it at first. I remember trying Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U on a snow day in January 2015. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try Bayonetta 2. So I tried Bayonetta 2, and I didn't get into it. And every time I've tried Bayonetta since, I just did not get into it.
We will make
Randomly, like a year ago, I tried Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U, and I actually like got into it. I was like, wow, this is really good. And I think a lot of the enjoyment from Bayonetta kind of comes from the fact that not only is it a very, very good action hack and slash game, it feels like some of the less interesting action sequences in Bayonetta are some of other games' most interesting action-based cutscenes. The amount of crazy stuff that you see in these games oftentimes are played by you, and the amount of stuff going on, the amount of crazy manipulation of the environment. A lot of times the environment's swirling around you and you're playing through it. It's not like, oh wow, this is some kind of cutscene. You're playing through it and you're seeing the environment just rip away, and you're just seeing like the shards in the environment just fling all around, and these crazy looking monsters just appear, and every little bit about them is moving and detailed and all of that. It is very impressive to watch, even if it's on unimpressive hardware. The animation and attention to detail in the Bayonetta games are amazing. But I feel like that's why Bayonetta 2 was kind of lauded as much as it was, especially compared to Bayonetta 3, which got very, very good reviews, but it wasn't as critically acclaimed as Bayonetta 2. I feel like it's just because of the time of the release. Bayonetta 2 came out in 2014, and that was around the time where Xbox 360 and PS3 were still being supported pretty frequently. And that kind of meant that a lot of the games coming to PS3 and Xbox 360 were also PS4 and Xbox One games. They were multiplats. So a lot of the stuff coming to PS4 and Xbox One more so felt like Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 games that looked a lot better, but were still kind of 360 and PS3 games at their core, which is why Bayonetta 2 still felt really impressive at the time, because even though it was on the Wii U, games were still hovering around that visual fidelity. So, couple the amazing action sequences and animation and attention to detail with the fact that, yeah, that was around the presentation we were expecting from games around that time. And yeah, of course, people were like, oh my god. With Bayonetta 3, it's been, nearly 10 years since Bayonetta 2 already. And Bayonetta 3 is still on hardware that's very comparable to Bayonetta 2. So while, yes, the animation and attention to detail is incredible in Bayonetta 3, it's a lot more noticeable that the hardware is much less powerful than, what we're used to with the PS5 and Xbox Series X. So I think that definitely makes Bayonetta 3 less impressive now than Bayonetta 2 was in 2014. But still, they're all fantastic games. You can't really go wrong with any of them. And you can kind of start with whichever one you want. I'm sorry for the ramble about it. And I'm sorry if I got a lot of stuff wrong. This is just coming from somebody who's played about 4 hours of Bayonetta 3 so far, about 4 hours of Bayonetta 2 so far, and about 2 hours of Bayonetta 1. So you combine all of that experience, and I've played basically one Bayonetta game. Next up is Big Brain Academy, Brain vs. Brain. Oh, yeah, this one disappointed me. I love Big Brain Academy, Wii Degree on the Wii. That one had one of my favorite multiplayer modes, and it's like a multiplayer mode that's like shocking how fun it is because it's goddamn brain teasers, but it's fun. It's like, oh man, who's smarter? Obviously, it's just like, you think about like how much people like want to kill each other during a game of Mario Party, and you add like who's smarter to the bunch, and nobody wants to be the fucking idiot of the group, so it's just like, yeah, Big Brain Academy multiplayer is amazing. This game though feels very, very lacking. It kind of feels in line with a lot of Nintendo's casual efforts on Switch, where it does feel like a lot of it lacks in content. And it's like weird how they lack in content. Brain Training on Switch, I haven't played Brain Training on Switch, but that one I've heard lacks a lot of content. Nintendo Switch Sports, something a lot of people complain about with that one is the lack of content. Big Brain Academy has content, but most of it's just recycled from the DS game and the Wii game. And when this one was released like 14 years or so after the last Big Brain Academy game, and this is all they could do? Now, to be fair, I think they expect a lot of the replay value to come from online multiplayer. Yeah, it's one of my least favorite things about a lot of like Nintendo releases these days is how they kind of expect the online multiplayer to be the main reason why you replay the game. I'm like, we'll put content in it and online multiplayer, and we're talking. But no, it's just a bunch of old exercises, basically. The multiplayer is incredibly disappointing in this one. It is incredibly short. It's like a 5-minute round. Like, you're playing for like 5, maybe 10 minutes, and then it's over, and then that's it. And it's not... I just like... I'm like, this is lame. The Wii game had just more of a fun presentation with the multiplayer that just lasted longer. It felt like you would sit down for like 30 minutes or something with a friend and you'd, battle through it. And that was long enough to the point where it's just like that one game is satisfying. You could come back in for another and it's like, like it just felt right. It just felt like a meaty enough mode to really keep you coming back. The multiplayer in Big Brain Academy, Brain vs. Brain, it's just so shallow. There's just nothing to it. The online stuff is pretty nice. It's mostly just playing ghosts. So, you play and you upload your gameplay to the internet, and then your friends and other people from around the world can play your time and try to beat you. That's good. That's a fun, addition to the series. But that feels like it's the only addition here. It's not a bad game. It's okay. And it was only like $30, so like it's not that bad. But this just feels like the kind of game where this shouldn't be lacking in content. This feels like a game that should be fairly easy to just have a lot of stuff to do in it without it being like a huge effort on Nintendo's part, on the developer's part, or take too much of a budget or take too much time to put together. You could compile like all the stuff from like the Wii game and the DS game or something. And the DS game was still a little lacking in content in of itself. And the Wii game, overall, if you combine all of the modes and all of the mini games, Like, yeah, it's probably fairly comparable, but I just want to see like evolution and improvements in these games and series rather than like, well, it's how it's always been, so it's acceptable. I feel like a lot of Nintendo's games these days just kind of have a problem with like presentation of content, and I don't mean like graphics or anything, more so like how they present the content to you, and how they can just tweak some things here and there to just make them just easily more replayable without breaking the bank on development time and budget. Like, damn, just take like a character from Mario Strikers, just take one of those characters and make them unlockable. Just take a couple more fields and make those unlockables, and just have more stuff you unlock via the coins or something. I don't know. Or like add medals where it's just like, oh, you kicked the ball 12 times, here's a medal or something. I don't know. Just stuff where it's just like, this is easy to implement. This will keep people playing for some godforsaken reason. I don't know. I'll move on. The Binding of Isaac Afterbirth Plus. Yeah, this is one of the first Nintendo Switch games that released after the launch. It was in March of 2017, and this was a big deal because I remember they said like, oh man, it's only gonna have this cover for a little bit limited time, and then we're switching over to something else. And yeah, the new cover is a little less grim. It's blue, and it thankfully doesn't have this horrible spine that is true to the game's logo, but it clashes with the rest of the Nintendo Switch's library. But yeah, Binding of Isaac is a great game. I remember I tried playing it back when it first came out for the Switch. I didn't like it because it is a darker game. I remember saying that, and a lot of people are like, you gotta be kidding me, dude. Like Binding of Isaac is just funny. how dark it is. And I'm just like, dude, there's shit everywhere. Like, I'm a naked child running away from my mother who's trying to sacrifice me. I don't think I'm out of line by saying you gotta be in the mood to play it. But there's a ton to this game. It's randomly generated in terms of layout and level design. So that means, like, you know, you play it, you go on a run, see how far you go, and it can be very addicting. I recently played it for some footage, and yeah, I definitely got into it a lot more than I did the first time. It's not 100% my type of game, but I had fun with it. So, you know, if you want a good quality, you know, dungeon crawler, you can't do much better than this these days. Next up, we have Bloodstained: Ritual of the Night. This was very unfortunate because this came out a little after, I believe, the PS4 and Xbox One versions. Maybe I can correct myself if I'm wrong around here. But, yeah, well, either way, it didn't run as well. It'd be expected, but still, it was unfortunate mainly because, you know, this is a spiritual successor, if you will, to the Castlevania series, namely, you know, the games post Symphony of the Night, and those are probably going to do best on Nintendo platforms. Symphony of the Night came out on the PlayStation, so, you know, obviously a lot of PlayStation users will, you know, enjoy a game like this. But a lot of those style Castlevania games came out for Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and of course Castlevania originally started as a Nintendo series. So it's a very Nintendo-centric series. And when you have a Nintendo-centric series that does not have a great version on the Nintendo platform, that's just always unfortunate. But I believe they did kind of fix this game up. And yeah, it's a good quality Castlevania style game. I remember it just didn't look very good for a very long time, and they actually listened to fan feedback, and they ended up tweaking a couple things that just made a huge difference in the end. I remember they had that trailer where they had the game's director, Koji Igarashi, pretty much sitting there as like YouTube comments kind of appeared saying how the game looked like ass, and he got frustrated, and then it showed the just the side-by-side of like how the game was back then and how the game is now. And the game uses like 3D, like a 2.5D kind of setup where it's 3D models, you know, on a 2D plane. And it looks fine. It looks fine. But obviously I think a lot of people would have loved 2D art. But I believe they said the reason because of that was like 3D models are just budgetarily better. Like, they're not as expensive to produce, handcrafted 2D sprites, and that's fair. Overall, the game turned out to be pretty good. I think actually the side game, Curse of the Moon, they had a side game came out before called Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which was in the style of the NES Castlevanias, and that got a sequel. So it almost seems like the side game ended up being a little more popular. But hey, I mean, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, I don't hear many people talk about this game much anymore, but it's a solid time. Next up, we have Bravely Default 2. I don't give a damn. Yeah, so I can't really criticize this game much because I only really played the demo. It just ain't for me. It just ain't for me. It is an RPG of RPGs. And it's something where not even like the style and story can really appeal to me because it's like, it's a sequel to Bravely Default. And, the graphical style just doesn't look that great to me. It doesn't look bad, but it's just not appealing to anybody outside of like the existing Bravely Default fan base, in my opinion. Yeah, this one just does not do it for me. This kind of continues the relationship Square Enix and Nintendo have when it comes to their RPGs on Nintendo Switch, where they've been producing a lot of like exclusives, or at the very least timed exclusives for the Nintendo Switch, with Octopath Traveler and not Project Triangle Strategy, just Triangle Strategy, and of course Bravely Default 2. And at the very least, Octopath and Triangle Strategy and Live Alive, they all have the art style, which, we'll talk about when we get to those games, which at the very least kind of makes them a little more interesting. This one doesn't look bad, but it's also like, it doesn't stand out to me at all. It's a good game for what it is, but I think it's really meant for the fans of the series. I don't really see many people who have not already been into Bravely Default or are not already into very old school RPGs really getting into this one. And we have Burnout Paradise Remastered. I love Burnout Paradise. It's probably not the best Burnout game because they dropped Crash Mode, which was the fun thing in Burnout, where the entire point was to crash. And it's still fun to crash your cars in this game, but it's not its own separate arcadey mode. But overall, this game is just so much fun to just drive around in. Just drive for like 10 minutes. If you just have time to spare and you just want to play something and just want to kind of zone out, Burnout Paradise is fantastic for that. Remember when Burnout Paradise Remastered was announced, I was really disappointed at the lack of a Nintendo Switch version. It came out around March of 2018. I remember because I picked it up alongside Kirby Star Allies on the Switch. And I played that a lot on PS4. Love Burnout Paradise. And this finally came out for Nintendo Switch in the summer of 2020. And it's a great version of the game. But it is one of those things where it's like a version that just came out too late. If it came out alongside the other versions, I would have played it endlessly. Now, like, I played it for a couple hours, I'm like, that's good. I'm happy. And I didn't really play much more of it. That just shows it's just like, I really wish these versions would come out like quicker alongside the other versions, or they wouldn't come out until it's too late. Because I feel like a game like Persona 5 Royal, that was like something where people were begging like years ago. They were like, come on, like, why isn't that on Nintendo Switch? And now it's on Nintendo Switch, and I didn't even see anybody talk about it. So, I don't know, that just shows it's just like, you can't wait too long on that kind of stuff. It's gonna bite you in the ass. Next, we have the physical version of Cadence of Hyrule, the Crypt of the Necrodancer Legend of Zelda crossover title. What an interesting release. I wish they would do this more often. This is one of Nintendo's like only indie collaborations, like very heavy indie collaborations. I mean, they've collaborated with indie developers before, but this is giving an indie developer the entire Legend of Zelda license, which is unheard of. Yeah, I think this is awesome. It's a little strange that they let them just do a straight up crossover between Crypt of the Necrodancer and Zelda. I can't speak for everybody here, but I do feel like a lot of people heard of Crypt of the Necrodancer for the first time via this crossover title, which is fantastic. That just shows how good of an idea this was, not only for the indie studio, but Nintendo, because it gives a lot of people a new Zelda game, but it also gives this indie studio with their IP a lot more of a spotlight. But it's also like, I wonder why Nintendo just didn't ask the developer, like, hey, do you want to make your own Zelda title? Just make this all about Zelda. But that probably makes it like super canon, and I think Nintendo just wants to be like, this is just a funny little game. Who cares? Just it's a crossover game, doesn't count. Whatever. I think making it a crossover means they didn't have to be as hands-on with it. It could just be like a fun little thing. But yeah, this physical release came out like a year or so after the initial one. Really awesome title. I didn't play it too much, but it is something that I definitely want to get more into. It's one of those games where you can either beat it in like 10 minutes or it might take you 5 hours. It just depends on what the game throws at you, because this is another like procedurally generated, random generated kind of dealio. And yeah, I think it is a wonderful idea for a rhythm game. It actually, put more eyes on Crypt of the Necrodancer, and it's a really cool entry in the Zelda series on Switch as well. All right, Capcom Fighting Collection, another one I haven't played yet, still in the wrap there. Bought it, but I'm going to play it very, very soon.
Come on, let's go.
Capcom has been doing a lot of these collections where it just kind of feels like it's just a bunch of random shit. Like, it's just like the Capcom Fighting Collection, okay, you get Hyper Street Fighter 2. Why wasn't that in the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection? Super Puzzle Fighter 2. That's a stretch. I mean, I'll give you the fact that it's a puzzle game, fighting game, hybrid kind of thing, but it feels like that was just included because they were like, I mean, we could include that. This feels like mostly an excuse to put out kind of a Darkstalkers collection, without calling it a Darkstalkers collection, because how much popularity does the Darkstalkers name have these days? So this is kind of a way to include this alongside like some Street Fighter stuff and some other Capcom stuff, just kind of making an all-in-one Capcom Fighting Collection. But Capcom's collections just get a little confusing because a lot of them have like overlap with each other. Like Capcom has their whole like arcade collection on the eShop. I believe it's like Capcom Arcade Stadium, and then there's a second one of that. And Street Fighter, they got a bunch of Street Fighters in there, which are also in the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection. And Street Fighter Anniversary Collection includes most of the Street Fighter games, except for Hyper Street Fighter 2 and Puzzle Fighter 2. And then you have the Capcom Beat 'em Up Bundle, which includes games like Final Fight, but doesn't include the other Final Fight games. So yeah, I feel like Capcom, I'll give them this. I'm happy they're doing their re-releases and their compilations. But a lot of times, their compilations miss a couple key titles, and a lot of times those key titles or other games are included in other collections, and it gets confusing. It gets confusing as to like which games have which titles, and also like why some games are included and why some games are included. It's always weird, but this is still a cool release. Capcom Fighting Collection. Definitely interested in giving it a try, and I can't wait until Capcom Fighting Collection Volume 2, which will include Alright, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. This started out as definitely worse, in my opinion, than the Wii U version. Featured new courses based on Super Mario Odyssey. That was kind of this game's big selling point with the new Nintendo Switch version, and also the 3DS version, which I thought was way cooler of an idea. The fact that this game came to the 3DS, because it feels like it all came full circle. The Captain Toad stages felt like they were kind of designed for the 3DS's screen. So to kind of see them make a 3DS version all those years later was just very cool. But yeah, the only real addition they had to Captain Toad on Switch was the inclusion of a couple new stages based on worlds from Super Mario Odyssey, but those replaced content in the Wii U version. The Wii U game had levels based on Super Mario 3D World. Now, these weren't incredible levels by any means. They were pretty much just the exact same levels from Super Mario 3D World, but now with like some ladders and some things removed, so then Captain Toad could play in them, because Captain Toad can't jump. That's his whole gimmick. And those stages were only ever supposed to be like fun little bonuses that you get for either having Mario 3D World save data or beating the game. They were never meant to be anything special. It wasn't like, oh my god, did you hear? Clear my calendar, Super Bell Hills and Captain Toad! But the fact they removed them was just kinda lame. I just found that to be lame. They also changed the ending of this game. Originally, in the Wii U version, it was meant to be a prequel to Super Mario 3D World, but the Switch and 3DS versions turn it into a prequel to Super Mario Odyssey, which is way more of a stretch. And all they did was to change the end credits a little bit. I don't know. It's just not as cool. And in my opinion, this version just plays in a much more clunky way. There's a cursor on screen at all times that you cannot disable, you can't get rid of. And that's supposed to be like your touch screen. If you're not playing in handheld mode, you have to have that damn pointer on screen at all times, and it's blinking. It blinks. It's unbelievably annoying, and you can't get rid of it. It doesn't even fade away during levels where it's just like, you don't really need it here. It's still perfectly playable, but there's enough segments in Captain Toad that really relied on the Wii U gamepad in non-essential ways, but it was more so the game was designed around, hey, touch the touchscreen right now, and there's ways to work around that, and if they really put some time and thought into kind of reworking some of those elements of the game to work without a touchscreen, it could work perfectly fine. The problem is the game was originally designed like that, and they didn't want to rebuild elements of the game too much, so they just kind of did some little workarounds, like the whole, like, oh man, it's time to turn a crank, and in the Wii U version, you'd have to turn the touchscreen. If you're playing on the Switch, on the TV, you get like a view that looks like this, and it's just awkward, doesn't feel organic. That's my main problem with this version. It feels a little shoehorned on the Switch in many ways. It runs great, it looks great, all of that's fine. It's just oddly a Wii U game that we never really thought worked better on Wii U, or like really utilized the Wii U to its full extent. But man, when you take that Wii U gamepad away, like, a lot of things about Captain Toad just don't add up. However, they updated this game quite a bit. They added, like, co-op? Like, full-blown, like, 2-player multiplayer to this version as a free update. They released paid DLC, which includes a bunch of new levels. They included VR support with the Nintendo Labo VR headset. So within a year, this became the definitive version of Captain Toad. It originally launched in a state where I was like, I don't know. But eventually it got to the point where it was like, yeah, this is the definitive one. It has it has 2-player co-op, all of that. The DLC, I feel like, was not played by anybody. I don't think anybody played the DLC. Because it launched at a weird time. It was something where it's just like, why? Why? Catherine Full Body. I haven't played this game. I have it on PS4. I haven't played that version either. I think I got this the Black Friday deal, so nothing crazy. But this was like one of Atlus's first games on Switch, which was one of the thing. Like it feels like it's a tradition with some developers on the Switch where their first game was kind of the game that absolutely nobody asked for. Not saying Catherine is a bad game, more so like everybody was asking for the Persona series on Switch, and Atlus was like, well, let's test the waters with Catherine. This feels like, why? Why not test the waters with the game that you hear everybody say they want? But I digress. I've heard Catherine is a very interesting game, kind of like a puzzle game, weirdly enough, and I'm definitely interested in trying it out. This version comes with a little keychain right there. It's very interesting how so many Switch games come with like little keychains like that. We'll see that. The Binding of Isaac, I forgot. I believe that comes with some stickers, and at the very least, like a manual. Again, an NES-style manual that looks like Zelda. Yeah. Cave Story Plus here. It's another game, at least by Nicholas, or Nicalis. They published a lot of the indie games in 2017. That was kind of like a big thing on the Switch, was the fact that a lot of indie games got physical releases. By them specifically. And they always come with little goodies. I believe Cave Story came with like a mini CD, which is very interesting. That is kind of a cool thing where it's just like, hey, let's include a soundtrack CD in our Nintendo Switch game. It's gonna have to be a mini one. Very cool. I never got into Cave Story that much. I played it a little bit, but it is something that is on my wall of shame. Next up, something that's also on my wall of shame. Loving Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics. This is one of my favorite Switch games. It's perfect. No, not really, but it's very good at what it is. I think Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics is this great collection of really nice little cardboard game style things. Not even just that. I mean, they have some fun little games like bowling, golf, billiards, and they're all in kind of like a fun little tabletop form. You also have like shooting gallery. It feels like Clubhouse Games is like this really fun collection of We Play style games alongside some card and board games. I love it. It looks fantastic. It sounds great. The presentation is just immaculate in this game. And I think the controls work great. Bowling's a little weird, especially compared to Wii Sports and Nintendo Switch Sports, but I think it works pretty good for what it is. And you can also use the touchscreen if you want, so, they have a couple options. Though I think one of the big problems with this game is the lack of some options. I think it's really strange that bowling doesn't support 4 players, where it's like, you're taking turns. Why not have 7 players? I don't know. But yeah, this is one of my favorite Switch releases. Not my favorite, but it's definitely in like top 20, top 15. Honestly, I really love it. I think it exceeds at what it sets out to do. That's all you can really ask for some games. Collection of Mana. I wanted to pick this up because it was such a cool release. It initially came out for the Switch in Japan, I believe around the launch of the system. Probably because it was a fairly easy thing for them to do in Japan. It's just a collection of all 3 of the Mana games. You have the first one on Game Boy, which was Final Fantasy Adventure over here, and then the sequel, which a lot of people know about, which is Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo. But then there was a 3rd game that was only in Japan for the longest time, and a lot of people just called it Secret of Mana 2. It was a big game in like the reproduction SNES cartridge scene. A lot of people would want Secret of Mana 2 with a fan translation, but it finally came out. It finally came out as Trials of Mana, and fully localized by Square. And this was localized around 2019, and it was announced alongside like a full 3D HD remake of Trials of Mana, which is insane. Like, they only announced Trials of Mana, the remake. They were like, hey, we're bringing this game over, and we're also making it like this full-blown remake, but we're also localizing the original too. That was a huge like 1-2 punch there. That was insane. I love seeing this kind of stuff happen. Secret of Mana is a really good action RPG on the Super Nintendo. If you're not super into RPGs, specifically turn-based stuff like I am a lot of the time, Secret of Mana is a solid one to check out, and especially its sequel, Trials of Mana. Oh boy, Colors Live! I remember playing Colors 3D on the 3DS back in 2012. That was an eShop game. It was a sequel, I believe, to a game that was a big homebrew art application on the DS, which was pretty interesting how like this series started out as like something you pretty much had to hack your DS for or get illegitimately, and they upgraded it to like, hey, we're doing this legitimately. Here's Colors 3D on the eShop. And then fully like, hey, on the Nintendo Switch, we have an accessory and a full-blown physical release. That's really cool. I think Colors 3D was a really great little art application on the 3DS. You could make 3D art, not like 3D as in like, like 3D, more so stereoscopic, like, wow. Like you were just painting images, but you could add different layers of depth. I really liked it back in the day. However, when I played it, it was 2012, so I would have been, 14, moving on to 15. I had time to do that. Nowadays, I feel like applications like this are really only meant for people who genuinely have nothing else. You just have a Nintendo Switch, that's all you have, and you want to make digital art, then yeah, sure, this is for you. But for me personally, I have an iPad with an Apple Pencil, and that is like a digital artist's best friend. I'm not calling myself like a digital artist, like, oh, wow. More so, I draw a lot for like what I do. A lot of times I'll have to sketch something or take notes or create like an animatic or storyboards for artists and animators to base their work off of. And the iPad is very, very useful at that. And also sometimes I like to try to get back into art because I was really into art as a kid. And the iPad is like the perfect companion tool for that. Colors Live is still very limiting. For a Nintendo Switch art application, it's pretty good, but like if you only have a Nintendo Switch, that's kind of the only way I can really recommend this. And even then, in most instances, I would probably just tell you like, hey, just keep saving up. Just keep saving up for like an iPad. That's probably a better solution. But I really appreciate a lot of the work that went into this. They designed an entire accessory that you plug into the headphone jack, and it uses like audio waves. It's called like the Sonar Pen. So